When most people think of pirates, they imagine treasure maps, buried gold, black flags fluttering in the wind, and fearless captains sailing across distant seas. They picture peg legs, parrots, hidden islands, and adventures on the open ocean. For centuries, stories of pirates have filled books, movies, and legends. Their names have become part of popular culture, and their lives have been transformed into myths that continue to fascinate us today. But the real story of pirates was far more dangerous and often far stranger than the legends suggest. The golden age of piracy was a brief period in history when the world's oceans became some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Merchant ships carried fortunes in gold, silver, sugar, and spices across vast stretches of ocean. Powerful empires fought for wealth and territory. And wherever great riches traveled, there were always those willing to risk everything to take them. Some pirates were ruthless criminals. Others were desperate sailors seeking a better life. Many lived short and violent lives, constantly hunted by navies and governments determined to bring them to justice. Yet despite the dangers, piracy flourished. For a few remarkable decades, pirates challenged some of the most powerful nations on Earth and created a legend that would outlive them by centuries. Tonight, we will journey back to that extraordinary era. We will discover how piracy began, why so many men chose the pirate life, and what daily life aboard a pirate ship was really like. We will meet the most famous pirate of them all, Blackbeard, whose terrifying reputation spread fear across the Atlantic Ocean. And we will follow the rise and fall of the golden age of piracy, from its beginnings to its dramatic end. So settle in, relax, and let the winds carry us back across the centuries. This is the real story of pirates. Chapter 1. The Sea Becomes a Highway. Long before pirates raised black flags over the oceans, the seas of the world were changing. For thousands of years, oceans had acted as barriers. They separated continents, cultures, and civilizations. Crossing them was dangerous, slow, and often deadly. Storms could appear without warning. Ships could vanish without a trace. Entire voyages sometimes ended with crews lost forever beneath the waves. But by the late 1600s, something remarkable had happened. The oceans were no longer barriers. They had become highways. Across the Atlantic Ocean, ships traveled constantly between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Powerful empires competed for wealth on a scale never before seen. Every year, thousands of vessels crossed the seas carrying goods, soldiers, settlers, and treasure. The world was becoming connected. And wherever great wealth travels, thieves are never far behind. The nations of Europe were growing richer than ever before. Spain had built an empire stretching across much of the Americas. From its colonies came enormous quantities of silver and gold. Vast treasure fleets crossed the Atlantic, carrying fortunes back to Europe. England, France, and the Netherlands were expanding as well. Colonies produced sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other valuable goods that could be sold for enormous profits. A single ship might carry a cargo worth millions in today's money. The oceans had become the world's most important trade routes, and those trade routes were often poorly protected. To understand why piracy flourished, it helps to imagine the size of the oceans. The Atlantic alone covers more than 100 million square kilometers. Even the most powerful navy could not patrol every route. Merchant ships often traveled alone. Weeks might pass without seeing another vessel. If trouble appeared on the horizon, help was usually far away. For pirates, this created an opportunity. A merchant ship loaded with treasure was a tempting target. And there were many such targets. But the rise of piracy was not only about money. It was also shaped by war. The 17th century was filled with conflicts between European powers. England fought France. Spain fought the Dutch. Empires battled for land, resources, and influence. Thousands of sailors served aboard military ships during these wars. Life at sea was difficult. Discipline was harsh. Food was often poor. Disease was common. Many sailors endured terrible conditions for little reward. Then, when wars ended, a new problem emerged. Governments no longer needed such large fleets. Thousands of experienced sailors suddenly found themselves unemployed. They knew the trade routes, and many had few opportunities waiting for them on land. For some, piracy began to look attractive. The life of a pirate was dangerous, but it offered something many sailors had never experienced: freedom, or at least the promise of it. As trade expanded, certain regions became especially important. One of these was the Caribbean. Today, the Caribbean is often associated with beaches, tropical islands, and crystal-clear waters. 300 years ago, it was one of the most contested regions on Earth. European empires fought constantly for control of islands and shipping routes. Treasure ships passed through its waters every year. Small islands provided countless hiding places. Protected bays and remote coves offered safe harbors for those seeking to avoid the authorities. For pirates, it was the perfect environment. Some ports even developed reputations as pirate strongholds. In places where government control was weak, pirates could repair ships, recruit crew members, and spend their stolen wealth. Taverns filled with sailors from around the world. Rum flowed freely. Stories of fortune and adventure spread from table to table. Young sailors listened carefully. Many dreamed of finding wealth of their own. Of course, the reality was usually much harsher than the stories. Most pirates never found enormous treasure. Many died young. Others were captured and executed. Yet the possibility of success continued to attract recruits. The risks were enormous, but so were the rewards. As the oceans grew busier, pirate attacks became increasingly common. A lookout aboard a merchant vessel might spot a ship appearing on the horizon. At first, it seemed harmless, but slowly it drew closer. Perhaps it flew a familiar flag. Perhaps it pretended to be a friendly vessel. Then, at the last moment, the deception would end. Cannons would be revealed. Weapons would appear. A black flag might rise into the wind. The hunt had begun. Pirates preferred intimidation over battle whenever possible. A damaged ship could sink. A dead crew could not reveal where valuables were hidden. If fear alone convinced a merchant captain to surrender, everyone benefited, at least from the pirate's perspective. As a result, reputation became one of the pirate's most powerful weapons. The more feared a pirate captain became, the less often he needed to fight. Stories spread quickly across the oceans. A successful pirate might become known throughout entire regions. Merchants whispered names in fear. Captains watched the horizon nervously. Governments issued warnings. And among sailors, legends began to grow. Some of these legends were exaggerated. Others were entirely true. But together they helped create the image of the pirate that survives even today. The oceans of the early 18th century were a world of opportunity, danger, and uncertainty. Trade was expanding, empires were growing, wealth moved constantly across the seas, and in the shadows of that wealth, piracy flourished. The conditions were perfect. The highways of the ocean were open, the targets were plentiful, and thousands of sailors were searching for a new path in life. The golden age of piracy was about to begin. But who exactly became pirates? Were they ruthless criminals driven only by greed? Or were they ordinary sailors seeking a better life? The truth, as we shall see, is far more complicated. And it begins with the men who chose to sail beneath the black flag. Chapter 2. Who became pirates? When most people imagine pirates, they often picture ruthless criminals who chose a life of crime simply because they enjoyed it. The image is familiar. A dangerous outlaw with a sword in one hand and a pistol in the other, eager to attack any ship unfortunate enough to cross his path. Some pirates certainly fit that description, but the reality was far more complicated. Many pirates did not begin their lives as criminals. In fact, most started as ordinary sailors. To understand why so many men became pirates, we must first understand what life at sea was really like during the 17th and 18th centuries. For the average sailor, life could be miserable. Merchant ships were crowded, uncomfortable, and dangerous places. Crews worked long hours under harsh conditions. Food was often poor. Fresh water could become scarce. Disease spread easily through cramped quarters. Storms could destroy ships without warning. Even routine voyages carried significant risks. Yet the physical dangers were only part of the problem. Many sailors were treated badly by their employers. Captains often held enormous power over their crews. Punishments could be severe. A sailor who disobeyed orders might be whipped in front of the entire crew. Pay was frequently low. Sometimes sailors were not paid at all. Months of hard work could end with disappointment when ship owners found excuses to withhold wages. The situation aboard naval vessels was often even worse. European governments needed huge numbers of sailors to crew their warships. Finding volunteers was not always easy. As a result, some countries turned to a practice known as impressment. Men could be forced into naval service against their will. A sailor walking through a port city might suddenly find himself seized and placed aboard a warship. His choices disappeared overnight. For many, life under such conditions felt little different from imprisonment. When wars ended and thousands of sailors lost their jobs, piracy began to appear surprisingly attractive. Pirate ships offered something rare in the world of the early 18th century: choice. A sailor joined voluntarily. If he became part of a pirate crew, he often had a voice in important decisions. This may sound strange to modern ears, but pirate ships were sometimes more democratic than many legitimate organizations of their time. Captains did not always rule absolutely. On many pirate vessels, crew members voted on important matters. They could even remove captains who proved ineffective. The captain still possessed considerable authority, especially during combat, but his power was often limited in ways that were unusual for the era. Pirates also divided loot differently than many people expect. Instead of all wealth going to a wealthy owner or powerful government, captured treasure was typically shared among the crew. The captain received a larger portion, officers received additional shares, but ordinary sailors also benefited. For men accustomed to receiving little reward for dangerous work, this arrangement could be very appealing. Some pirate crews even created compensation systems for injuries. A sailor who lost an arm, a leg, or an eye might receive additional shares of treasure. It was a rough form of insurance in a world where few such protections existed. Of course, pirate life was hardly ideal. The risks were enormous. Every pirate knew that capture could lead to execution. Governments viewed piracy as a serious threat to trade and national interests. Captured pirates were often hanged publicly as a warning to others. Their bodies were sometimes displayed near busy harbors to discourage would-be recruits. The message was clear: choose piracy and you may not live long. Yet many men accepted that risk. Part of the reason was simple economics. A successful pirate raid could earn more money than years of honest work. Stories of sudden wealth spread quickly through port cities. A sailor who had spent years struggling to survive might hear tales of pirates returning with pockets full of gold and silver. Whether those stories were entirely true hardly mattered. The possibility alone was enough to attract attention. Pirate crews came from many backgrounds. Some were former merchant sailors, others had served in navies, some were escaped servants, some were fishermen, others were adventurers searching for fortune. Crews often included men from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds. On pirate ships, practical skills frequently mattered more than social status. If a man could navigate, fight, repair sails, or handle a ship in dangerous weather, he was valuable. The sea cared little about where someone was born. Contrary to popular belief, not every pirate buried treasure. In reality, most loot was spent quickly. Life was uncertain. A pirate never knew how long he would remain free. Many preferred to enjoy their earnings immediately, rather than hide them for the future. The famous image of treasure maps and buried chests comes largely from later stories and novels. The real pirate world was often far less romantic. There was also a darker side. Pirates could be violent. Merchant crews were sometimes injured or killed. Coastal settlements were occasionally attacked. Fear spread throughout major trade routes. While some pirates tried to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, others developed reputations for brutality. The line between freedom and criminality could be very thin. Perhaps this contradiction is one reason pirates continue to fascinate us. They were both rebels and criminals, victims and predators, outlaws who challenged powerful empires, yet often preyed upon ordinary people. The reality refuses to fit neatly into simple categories. And among all the pirates who sailed during the golden age of piracy, one name became more famous than any other. His appearance alone terrified those who encountered him. Stories about him spread across the Atlantic. Some viewed him as a monster. Others saw him as a genius of intimidation. Centuries later, he remains the pirate most people think of when they imagine the age of piracy. His name was Blackbeard, and his legend was only beginning. Part 1. Chapter 3. Blackbeard, King of the Pirates. Of all the pirates who sailed during the golden age of piracy, none became more famous than Blackbeard. More than 300 years after his death, his name remains known around the world. Books have been written about him. Movies have portrayed him. Legends continue to grow around his life. Yet what made Blackbeard truly remarkable was not simply his success as a pirate. It was his understanding of fear. Long before modern psychology existed, Blackbeard realized something important. A terrified enemy is often easier to defeat than a determined one. And few men in history were better at creating terror. His real name was most likely Edward Teach, though historical records sometimes spell it differently. Historians believe he was born in England sometime around the late 17th century. Like many future pirates, he probably spent years at sea before turning to piracy. The oceans of his time were filled with opportunities for ambitious sailors. War had ended. Thousands of experienced seamen were unemployed. Trade routes overflowed with valuable cargo. The conditions were perfect for piracy to flourish. At some point, Teach joined the crew of a successful pirate captain named Benjamin Hornigold. Hornigold was already a respected figure among Caribbean pirates. Under his guidance, Teach learned the skills necessary to survive as an outlaw on the sea: navigation, ship handling, combat, leadership. Everything a pirate captain needed. It did not take long for Teach to prove himself. He was intelligent, ambitious, and fearless. Soon he began commanding ships of his own, and it was during this period that Edward Teach became Blackbeard. The name suited him perfectly. Blackbeard possessed a large, thick beard that helped create a striking appearance. But he did not stop there. Before battles, he would weave slow-burning fuses into his beard and hair. When lit, these fuses produced smoke that drifted around his face. Witnesses described him as looking almost supernatural, a figure emerging from clouds of smoke and fire. To frightened sailors, he seemed less like a man and more like a demon from a nightmare. This image was carefully planned. Blackbeard understood that reputation could be more powerful than cannons. If enemy crews surrendered immediately, he could capture ships without risking damage to his own vessel. Fear became one of his most effective weapons. And it worked. Stories about Blackbeard spread rapidly across the Caribbean and the Atlantic coast. Merchant captains dreaded encountering him. Sailors whispered his name in taverns. His legend grew larger with every retelling. At the height of his power, Blackbeard commanded one of the most formidable pirate ships of the era. It was called the Queen Anne's Revenge. The vessel had originally been a French slave ship before being captured by pirates. Blackbeard transformed it into a floating fortress. Armed with dozens of cannons, it was capable of overwhelming many merchant vessels. Simply seeing the ship approach could be enough to convince victims to surrender. The Queen Anne's Revenge became one of the most feared ships in the Atlantic. In 1718, Blackbeard carried out one of his boldest actions. Rather than attacking isolated ships at sea, he targeted the busy port of Charleston in the colony of South Carolina. For nearly a week, Blackbeard and his fleet effectively blockaded the harbor. Ships attempting to enter or leave were captured. Passengers were taken hostage. The authorities could do little to stop him. The blockade shocked colonial governments. A pirate captain had openly challenged an important port and succeeded. It demonstrated just how powerful some pirate crews had become. Yet, despite his fearsome reputation, Blackbeard was not necessarily the bloodthirsty monster portrayed in some stories. Historical evidence suggests he often relied on intimidation rather than violence. A surrender achieved through fear was safer for everyone involved. Dead sailors could not reveal where valuables were stored. Damaged ships could not be easily sold or used. For practical reasons, Blackbeard often preferred cooperation over slaughter. This does not mean he was harmless. Far from it. He was still a pirate responsible for theft, kidnapping, and countless acts of crime. But the reality was more complex than the legends. As Blackbeard's fame increased, so did the determination of governments to stop him. Piracy threatened trade, it embarrassed colonial authorities, and it challenged the power of the British Empire itself. Officials realized that allowing pirates to operate freely could not continue forever. A campaign began to hunt down the most notorious captains. Blackbeard became one of the primary targets. In late 1718, the hunt finally reached him. The governor of Virginia secretly commissioned an expedition led by a naval officer named Robert Maynard. Maynard's mission was simple: find Blackbeard, kill or capture him. The two forces eventually met near Ocracoke Island off the coast of present-day North Carolina. What followed became one of the most famous battles in pirate history. At first, Maynard appeared vulnerable. His ships carried fewer guns than Blackbeard's vessel, but he relied on a clever strategy. Many of his men hid below deck, making it appear that heavy casualties had already weakened his crew. Believing victory was near, Blackbeard ordered his men to board. As pirates leapt onto the deck, Maynard's hidden sailors suddenly emerged. A fierce hand-to-hand battle erupted. Swords flashed, pistols fired, smoke filled the air. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. According to contemporary accounts, Blackbeard fought fiercely until the very end. He reportedly suffered multiple gunshot wounds and numerous cuts before finally collapsing. Only then did the battle end. The most feared pirate in the Atlantic was dead. To prove the victory, Blackbeard's head was severed and displayed from Maynard's ship. The gruesome display served as a warning. The age of powerful pirate captains was beginning to draw to a close. Yet Blackbeard's death did not end his legend. In many ways, it strengthened it. Stories about hidden treasure began to circulate. Tales of his final battle grew more dramatic with each retelling. Over time, the man became larger than history itself. Today, Blackbeard represents the image of piracy more than any other figure. The beard, the pistols, the black flag, the fearless captain standing on the deck of a ship. Many of the pirate stereotypes familiar to modern audiences can be traced, directly or indirectly, to his legend. But Blackbeard was only one pirate. To understand the world he inhabited, we must look beyond famous names and dramatic battles. What was daily life actually like aboard a pirate ship? How were crews organized? How was treasure divided? And how much of what we think we know about pirates is actually true? The answers may be more surprising than the legends. Chapter 4. Life under the Black Flag. When most people think about pirates, they imagine the exciting parts: treasure, battles, storms, adventure. But for the men who actually lived aboard pirate ships, most days were not filled with dramatic sword fights or daring raids. Most days were spent at sea, and life at sea was rarely comfortable. Pirate ships were crowded, noisy, and often filthy places. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of men lived together in a very limited space. Privacy was almost non-existent. Crew members slept wherever they could find room. Many slept directly on the deck or in cramped sleeping areas below. The smell alone could be overwhelming. Months at sea meant little opportunity to wash properly, clothing became dirty, food spoiled. Wood absorbed moisture and odors. Combined with the constant presence of salt water, sweat, and animals, conditions could become unpleasant very quickly. Food was another challenge. Fresh food rarely lasted long on extended voyages. Fruit and vegetables spoiled within weeks. As a result, sailors relied heavily on preserved foods. Salted meat was common. So were dried beans and hard biscuits known as hardtack. Hardtack was so tough that sailors sometimes had to soak it in liquid before they could eat it. Unfortunately, these biscuits were often infested with insects after long periods at sea. Many sailors simply ate them anyway. There were few alternatives. Fresh drinking water presented another problem. Water stored in wooden barrels could become stale and unpleasant after weeks at sea. For this reason, sailors often drank beer, rum, or other alcoholic beverages, which sometimes remained safer to consume than contaminated water. The popular image of pirates constantly drinking rum contains a grain of truth, though reality was usually less glamorous than the legends suggest. Despite the hardships, many pirates still preferred their lives to those they had left behind. One reason was the way pirate crews organized themselves. In the early 18th century, most ships operated under strict hierarchies. Captains possessed enormous authority. Ordinary sailors had little say in how things were run. Pirate ships often functioned differently. Many pirate crews established written agreements known as articles. These documents acted as a kind of contract among crew members. The articles outlined rules, responsibilities, and the division of treasure. New recruits were expected to agree to them before joining. The exact rules varied from ship to ship, but many addressed similar issues. How would loot be shared? What punishments would apply for theft? What happened if a crew member deserted? The goal was to maintain order in an environment where discipline could mean the difference between life and death. Surprisingly, many pirate crews practiced forms of democracy. Captains were often elected. Crew members could vote on important matters. If a captain proved incompetent or unpopular, he could sometimes be removed. This arrangement was highly unusual for the time. Many ordinary sailors experienced more influence aboard pirate ships than they had ever possessed elsewhere. That does not mean pirate life was peaceful. Far from it. Arguments occurred frequently. Conflicts could escalate quickly in such stressful conditions. To maintain order, pirate crews enforced rules strictly. Punishments varied. A thief caught stealing from fellow crew members might lose his share of treasure. Other offences could result in whipping or abandonment. One of the most feared punishments was marooning. A troublesome sailor could be left alone on a remote island with only minimal supplies. Whether he survived afterward depended largely on luck. Pirates understood that discipline was essential. A ship at sea could not function if crew members refused to cooperate. Perhaps the most attractive aspect of piracy was the division of treasure. Unlike merchant ships or navies, pirate crews typically shared captured wealth among themselves. The captain received additional shares. Officers received more than ordinary sailors, but even common crew members could benefit significantly. For men accustomed to poor wages, the prospect of a valuable share was a powerful incentive. Yet many pirate attacks produced far less wealth than legends suggest. Movies often portray pirates discovering enormous chests overflowing with gold coins. In reality, valuable cargo frequently consisted of everyday goods: sugar, tobacco, cloth, food, tools. These items could still be sold for profit, but they lacked the dramatic appearance of treasure from popular stories. The famous image of buried treasure is also largely a myth. Most pirates spent their money quickly. Life expectancy was short, the future was uncertain. Many preferred immediate enjoyment over long-term planning. Taverns in pirate ports often benefited greatly whenever successful crews returned from sea. Another common myth involves pirate flags. Today, the black flag decorated with a skull and crossbones is instantly recognizable. This symbol became known as the Jolly Roger. However, pirate flags varied considerably. Different captains used different designs. Some included skeletons, others featured swords, hourglasses, or other symbols. The purpose was always the same: to inspire fear. When a merchant captain saw a pirate flag approaching, he immediately understood the message: surrender now, or face the consequences. Fear remained one of piracy's most effective weapons. Life aboard ship required every crew member to contribute. Sails needed constant attention, damage required repairs, lookouts watched for approaching vessels, cannons had to be maintained, navigation demanded skill and experience. The sea was unforgiving. Even a small mistake could prove disastrous. Storms represented one of the greatest dangers. Long before modern weather forecasting, sailors had little warning when severe weather approached. A powerful hurricane could destroy ships, regardless of who commanded them. Pirates feared storms as much as any merchant sailor. The ocean did not care whether a man was a pirate, a fisherman, or a naval officer. It treated everyone equally. Disease posed another constant threat. Crowded conditions allowed illness to spread rapidly. Injuries often became infected. Medical knowledge was limited. A minor wound that would be easily treated today could become life-threatening. Many sailors died, not from combat, but from sickness. Despite all these hardships, pirate crews developed strong bonds. Months spent facing danger together created loyalty and friendship. Crews relied on one another for survival. Trust mattered. A sailor needed confidence that the men beside him would perform their duties during storms, battles, and emergencies. Perhaps this sense of brotherhood explains part of piracy's appeal. For many men, pirate ships offered something they had rarely experienced elsewhere: a sense of belonging, a chance to share risks and rewards with others facing the same dangers. But while pirates built their own communities on the sea, powerful governments were watching. Trade was suffering. Merchant captains demanded protection. Colonial authorities grew increasingly frustrated. The more successful pirates became, the more determined their enemies grew. And soon, the world's most powerful navies would begin fighting back. The hunt for pirates was about to begin. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. For a brief moment in history, it seemed as though the pirates might win. Across the Caribbean and the Atlantic, pirate captains captured ships, seized cargo, and built fearsome reputations. Merchant captains worried about every voyage. Governors complained to distant governments. Trade routes became increasingly dangerous. The golden age of piracy had reached its peak. But success created a problem. The more powerful pirates became, the more attention they attracted. And eventually, the world's greatest empires decided they had seen enough. To governments, piracy was more than a crime, it was a direct threat to wealth and power. Every stolen cargo meant lost profits. Every captured ship weakened trade. Every successful pirate attack challenged the authority of kings and governments. For nations whose prosperity depended upon ocean trade, piracy could not be allowed to continue forever. The response began slowly. At first, authorities struggled to deal with the problem. The oceans were enormous. Pirates could disappear among countless islands, hidden coves, and remote coastlines. Capturing them was far easier in theory than in practice. A pirate ship could appear suddenly, strike quickly, and vanish before help arrived. But governments possessed one advantage pirates could never match: resources. The British Empire, France, Spain, and other powers could build ships, raise armies, and deploy navies on a scale pirates could only dream of. Once these governments committed themselves to ending piracy, the balance of power began to shift. One of the most important weapons in this campaign was not a cannon. It was a piece of paper: pardons. Governments offered many pirates a simple choice: surrender and receive forgiveness, or continue sailing and risk execution. For some pirates, the decision was easy. They had grown tired of constant danger. They had made enough money. They wanted a chance to return to ordinary life. Thousands accepted pardons. Many laid down their weapons and disappeared back into society. But not everyone was willing to give up the pirate life. Some captains distrusted government promises. Others enjoyed their freedom too much. And some simply believed they could continue avoiding capture. These men became the primary targets of an increasingly determined campaign. Governors throughout the Caribbean began cooperating more closely. Naval patrols increased. Ports that once tolerated pirates became less welcoming. Safe havens slowly disappeared. The noose was tightening. Among the most important figures in this campaign was a former pirate named Woodes Rogers. Unlike many government officials, Rogers understood piracy from the inside. He knew how pirates thought. He knew where they hid, and he knew how dangerous they could be. In 1718, Rogers arrived in Nassau, a settlement in the Bahamas that had become one of the most notorious pirate strongholds in the world. For years, Nassau had functioned almost like a pirate capital. Captains gathered there. Crews recruited new members. Stolen goods were bought and sold openly. Government authority had become little more than a distant idea. Rogers intended to change that. Using a combination of pardons and military force, he gradually re-established control. Some pirates surrendered. Others fled. The era of pirate safe havens was beginning to end. At sea, naval officers became increasingly aggressive. Special expeditions were organized specifically to hunt notorious pirate captains. Rewards were offered for captures. The larger a pirate's reputation, the larger the reward. Suddenly, many men had a financial incentive to track them down. Pirates who had once inspired fear now found themselves being hunted. One by one, famous captains fell. Some were captured after fierce battles. Others were betrayed by former allies. A few managed to escape temporarily, only to be caught later. The fate awaiting captured pirates was usually grim. Trials were often swift. Evidence was rarely difficult to find. Many pirates openly admitted their activities. If convicted, The punishment was usually death by hanging. Executions were frequently public events. Large crowds gathered to watch. Governments wanted these spectacles to send a message: piracy does not pay. The authorities hoped that fear would discourage future recruits. Sometimes the message became even more severe. The bodies of executed pirates were occasionally displayed near busy harbors. Sailors entering or leaving port would see them hanging in chains, a stark warning against following the same path. To modern eyes, such punishment seems shocking, but governments viewed piracy as a serious threat to national interests. They wanted the lesson to be unforgettable. As the years passed, pirate crews became smaller and more cautious. The easy targets of earlier decades grew harder to find. Merchant ships increasingly traveled with protection. Naval patrols became more common. Ports offered fewer places to hide. The seas were becoming less friendly to outlaws. The great pirate captains who had once dominated the Atlantic were disappearing. Some died in battle. Others swung from the gallows. Many simply vanished into history. The age of piracy was not ending because pirates had suddenly become weaker. It was ending because powerful governments had finally committed themselves to destroying it. And against the combined resources of entire empires, even the most successful pirate captains faced overwhelming odds. Yet, despite these efforts, the legends continued to grow. Every execution created new stories. Every battle became part of pirate mythology. The men themselves might die, but their reputations often survived. As the hunt intensified, the golden age of piracy entered its final chapter. The black flags that once dominated the sea were disappearing. The pirate republics were collapsing. The great captains were gone. And soon, one of the most famous eras in maritime history would come to an end. But while piracy itself faded, the legend would prove impossible to kill. Chapter 6. The End of the Golden Age. By the early 1720s, the world that had allowed piracy to flourish was disappearing. For decades, pirates had terrorized trade routes across the Atlantic and Caribbean. They had captured ships, challenged governments, and built legends that spread from one side of the ocean to the other. For a brief period, it had seemed as though the pirates belonged to a world of their own, a world beyond the reach of kings and empires. But that world could not last forever. The very forces that had helped create piracy were now working against it. Trade routes had become more organized. Navies had become stronger. Governments had become more determined. The seas were changing once again, and this time there would be fewer places left to hide. One by one, the great pirate captains disappeared. Blackbeard was killed in battle in 1718. Charles Vane, one of the most stubborn and defiant pirates of the age, was eventually captured and executed. Calico Jack Rackham met the same fate. Even famous figures like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, two of the most well-known women associated with piracy, found themselves caught in the collapse of the pirate world. The names that had once inspired fear were becoming part of history. Many pirates faced a difficult choice: continue sailing and risk certain death, or abandon the pirate life forever. Some accepted pardons and attempted to start new lives. Others faded into obscurity. A few returned to ordinary work at sea. History rarely records what happened to them afterward. They simply disappeared from the historical record, leaving only fragments behind. The pirate era had always been built on opportunity. When opportunities vanished, so did many pirates. Meanwhile, merchant shipping continued to grow. The oceans became busier than ever before. More goods crossed the seas. More colonies were established. More wealth flowed between continents. Governments understood how important this trade had become. Protecting it was no longer optional. It was essential. Naval patrols expanded. Ports became more secure. Local governors received greater support from their governments. The Caribbean, once filled with pirate hideouts and lawless harbors, slowly became more controlled. The age of the independent pirate captain was drawing to a close. By the mid-1720s, the golden age of piracy was largely over. It had lasted only a few decades. Compared to the long span of history, it was a surprisingly brief period. Yet its impact was enormous. The actual number of pirates was relatively small. They never controlled vast territories, they never built lasting empires, and they never truly threatened the great powers of Europe. Yet somehow they became legends. Why? Part of the answer lies in the stories. Pirates lived dramatic lives. They sailed across distant oceans. They fought battles. They chased fortune. They challenged authority. Their lives contained all the ingredients of a great adventure. Another reason is that pirates represented something many people secretly admired: freedom, or at least the appearance of freedom. While most people lived under strict social systems, pirate crews often ignored traditional rules. Captains could be elected, loot could be shared, ordinary sailors could have a voice. Of course, pirate life was dangerous and often brutal. But the idea of living outside society's rules captured the imagination of generations. As time passed, the real pirates slowly transformed into fictional ones. Writers began adding details. Stories became exaggerated. Facts mixed with legends. The pirates of history evolved into the pirates of popular culture. Many of the things people associate with pirates today came long after the Golden Age itself. Treasure maps marked with giant X's, talking parrots, wooden pegged legs, hidden islands overflowing with gold. Some of these ideas were inspired by real events. Others were inventions created by novelists and filmmakers. One of the most influential pirate stories ever written was Treasure Island, published in 1883. The book introduced many pirate images that remain familiar today. Characters like Long John Silver helped shape how generations imagined pirate life. Later came films, television shows, comic books, and video games. Each added new layers to the legend. Over time, the pirate became something larger than history, a symbol of adventure, a symbol of rebellion, a symbol of life on the open sea. The real pirates would probably find many of these stories amusing. Their daily lives involved hard work, disease, danger, and uncertainty. Few discovered vast fortunes. Many died young. Most never became famous. Yet history has a way of remembering certain people differently than they remembered themselves. And perhaps that is why the pirate story has survived for more than 3 centuries. Not because of the gold they stole, not because of the ships they captured, but because they occupied a unique place between reality and myth, They were real people living real lives. Yet their stories became legends. Today, the black flags no longer fly above merchant ships. The great pirate fleets are gone. The taverns of Nassau have fallen silent. The famous captains belong to another age, but their legacy remains. Whenever we read a pirate novel, watch a pirate film, see a treasure map, or imagine a distant ship appearing on the horizon, we are remembering a brief and extraordinary moment in history, a time when the oceans were vast, the world was changing, and a small group of outlaws became some of the most famous figures the seas have ever known. Their age ended long ago, but their legend never truly sailed away.